Alright, so we are ready to clean up, and what I have here is a very simple short animation made up of three poses, just three poses of this character doing a take. And right now these poses are stepped, so there are no in-betweens. And what I'm going to show you here is how to take this and clean it up, add the in-betweens and make it look better. So for one thing, I would never go straight from here to clean up in my normal workflow. I would add a few breakdowns just to define how the character is going to get from here to here and then from here to here. And you'll see why. As I get into this, you'll see why we need more breakdowns. When I start clean up, first I'll select all the controls of the character, go into the graph editor, press F to see all the keyframes, and now you notice all the keyframes are stepped. There are no in-betweens here. So I'm going to select all the keyframes, and as a first step, I'm going to go from stepped keys to linear tangents. What linear does is it takes a straight line in between from pose A to pose B and then pose B to pose C. The simplest way to transition from one pose to the other is just a straight line average. So this is what I get with linear tangents. So as you can see, I've got in-betweens, but they don't look very good. Let me show you. You see weird stuff happening with his eyes already. That's one. The other is every part of the body starts and stops the movement at the same time. It looks very mechanical. Every part of the body hits the pose at the same time. And that's just not how we move. That's just not natural. This is one of the reasons we add a lot of breakdowns. Because in reality, when people move, our whole bodies don't start and stop moving at the same time. We have staggered actions. We have lead and follow. Our head may start the action. In this case, because he's doing a take, his head may turn first and the rest of his body may follow later. His hands or arms may be the last ones to hit the pose. This is the whole reason we need breakdowns, or one of the biggest reasons. The other issue that you'll see is, as I play this, watch the timing. The timing is very bland, it's too smooth, it doesn't have the punch that you would expect from this kind of action, like a take. You would expect this take to be very snappy, very fast, but because of the linear in-betweens, we're not getting that. So that's another reason to add a lot of breakdowns before you go to clean up, because you can define the timing more precisely. But what if you're in this situation? You don't have the time, or you slacked off on your breakdowns and you're going straight from your key poses to clean up. Then what do you do? So we're going to have to add some keys here to break this down as we go. That's going to be part of our cleanup because we started off with just the key poses. But before I do that, in my preferences, right now I have set all my tangents to stepped. I'm going to change that to linear for now, so that the new keyframes that I set will come with linear tangent. And now I'm ready to start cleaning this up. So first, from frame 1 to frame 5 is the anticipation of the take. I'm going to go somewhere in between, like say frame 3, key everything and then fix the pose so that it looks a little more natural. So at frame 3 I select everything, key it, come back here, and I'm going to step back and forth and see what should I do at frame 3. How should I break down this anticipation? First thing I'm going to do is decide the lead and follow. From here to here, what part of the body should lead the action? What part should take precedence and what parts should follow? In this case, it makes sense that the head should lead because the whole point of this action is one of surprise. By head, I also kind of include the eyes. The head and eyes should lead this action. I'm going to make his facial expression closer to where we are going. One thing about lead and follow is that because the head is leading, the pose of the head and the facial expressions in the eyes will be closer to what they look like at frame 5 than what they look like at frame 1. The thing with linear in-betweens is the computer is deciding, so it's going to give you a very even in-between. Everything is going to be so uniform, and that's not how we really move. So we've got to favor one key pose over the other. In this case, with the head, I'm favoring the pose at frame 5. I'm going to turn his smile into more of a frown already, because that's where we are headed. I may even open his mouth a little bit because he's kind of surprised. There, because he's going to look towards this direction, and I'm trying to make his eyes lead the action. Okay. We can come back and tweak this after I see how this is going to transition. So I select everything, key it at frame 3, and now let's check how does it look, the progression from frame 1 to frame 5. The expression looks more natural now. I could play with the head tilt a little more. So at frame 3, I'm going to tilt his head this way. There, even better. Now notice also his waist, his body is moving down. I could decide if, because the head is leading, maybe the lower body should lag. So at frame 3 with the body control, I'm going to favor the pose at frame 1. So that means I'm going to take his body control higher instead of lower. Maybe I'll shift it even up for like an up before he goes down effect. Let's try that. That may work. Watch what's happening here. His head is starting to go down and right, but his body is, let's exaggerate this to see. His body is actually moving up. I'm going to have to correct this to make it work. You've got an up energy before we go down. This is something that you would never get if you left it up to the software. The software says, okay, from 1 to 5 you're going down and right. So every frame along the way we'll move a little bit down and right. But from an animator's point of view, it might make more sense to go up before you go down. So that's why we don't want to leave this up to the software. That's why we want to take control and add our own breakdowns. This is one more reason we add breakdowns, because sometimes we have to defy logic as animators. We have to go one way before we go the other. Even for an anticipation, I want to go up before I go down. Okay. So that takes care of frame 1 to 5. Now let's go on. What are we doing from frame 5 to 11? Let's play it and see. Notice from 5 to 11, the motion looks a little too slow for a take. I'm going to play it again. It looks like it's drifting. And that's not the right energy for a surprise action like a take. It's just not right. He's drifting slowly from 5 to 11. We want this take to be much more snappy. Yeah, these linear in-betweens are killing the surprise flavor of our take. So to get out of this, to get that surprise element back, we need a bit of a hold. So I'm going to add a hold here for a few frames. So it's very easy to start out with a hold. You're going to copy a keyframe. So I select all his controls, copy the keyframe at 5 and paste it at say 8. So I have a 3-frame hold and then 3 frames to get into this. Let's just play this and see how it looks. Already better, just by adding a static hold. And we didn't even do anything. The hold is very static, there's no change happening from 5 to 8. But just by adding the hold and by making this action shorter, instead of 6 frames, it's down to 3 frames. It's already looking better. Now all we have to do is take this hold and make it look more alive. A static hold where the exact pose is repeated from one pose to the other we call it a dead hold because nothing's moving. So we want to take this hold and make it alive. And then we want to make sure this transition from 8 to 11 works. Which right now it doesn't. As you can see, the eyes look kind of creepy. And I'm going to do pretty much the same thing that I did for fixing the transition from 1 to 5. Okay, at this stage, I'm just going to set a key just to see how this is going. Just by changing his head at frame 9, we already have a better transition. No matter what's going on in your scene, your audience is going to connect with your character through the eyes. Your audience is going to look at your character's eyes. So make sure whatever is happening with the rest of the body that you pay special attention to how the character's eyes, head, and face are animated, because that's going to get the most focus from your audience. So this transition is already looking better just by changing the face and eyes. I'm going to work on it a little bit more. Also, his eyes are bigger at frame 11, so I'm going to make at least one of his eyes bigger. You can do fun stuff like this at in-betweens, because this passes so quickly, no one's going to be bothered by the fact that one eye is bigger than the other. But if it helps with your transition, you can do goofy stuff like this and get away with it. Again, open his mouth a little bit, or maybe not. Maybe close it a little more, even tighter. Yep, that's even better. Instead of opening his mouth a little, I closed it even tighter. Now that face at frame 9 is looking really goofy, but it only lasts for a frame or two. I'll still tweak it a little bit. So let's see how this transition is looking. So I'm going to play this. Okay. Overall it works, but you notice we have a little hiccup here.
Yeah.
Between frame 5 and frame 8, he comes up and down again. So now we can turn our attention to that part of the animation. And something very weird is happening. He kind of comes up at frame 7 and goes down at frame 8, even though we have no keyframe. This happens when you're in cleanup because you're no longer in stepped keyframes. You have in-betweens going on, so the software will do some weird things, and you will have some strange transitions happening even though you have no keyframes there. When this happens, know that it's because of the tangents. And now it's time to go into the graph editor and clean this up. So let me select everything. Make sure the whole body is keyed at frame 9 because I only did a partial keyframe. And our focus area is now between frame 5 and frame 8. Okay, you see this? This is what's causing the little hiccup. So if I take these two keyframes, change the tangent to linear, that should get rid of the hiccup. Okay, which it does, but now we still have the problem of having a dead hold between frame 5 and frame 8 here. So all we need to do now is make this hold come alive. And this is an important thing to know in animation, whether you're doing 2D or 3D, to keep your holds alive. We call them moving holds, where the pose is held, but there is a little bit of motion happening. So there's no single rule for how to make your static holds into moving holds. It just depends on what comes before and after, what's really going on in this scene. So in this scene, we have he's going from a very happy, mellow state to a very shocked, kind of angry take, like, hey, what's going on there? So what would he do in this anticipation? One thing we could do, we kind of went up and came down, and then we're going to go up again. So what we could do is from frame 5 to frame 8, go down a little bit more. Just a little bit, just enough to keep the hold alive. Take his hands and, just for some contrast, move them up a little bit. Because if the rest of the body is going down and the hands come up, you get this nice tension in the animation, and you'll see. You see that now? The transition from frame 5 to frame 8 looks like this. Most of his body is going down, the hands are coming up. Build some nice contrast into our hold. Now let's play this. So what happened by moving him slightly down at frame 8, we get a really nice moving hold where it's almost like you're pulling a rubber band down and then allowing it to snap up. This is one way to treat a moving hold. You think about where the character came from and where they're going, and then you may want to just push the hold in one direction so that you can build the energy and then release it in the other direction. Another way to treat a moving hold is if it happens during a pause in an action, then you just might want to have the character rock a little bit or breathe a little bit. So with just these few changes, we already have a decent looking scene. I feel like his head is turning down a little too much at frame 8. I'm going to tweak that a little. Okay. And then at frame 9, his hands suddenly start to move down, so I'm going to adjust his hands. So what's happening with his hands from 8 to 11 is he went from relaxed hands to fists, and he went from hands pointing down to pointing up. So at 9, I'm going to adjust it a little bit. One thing I'll do at frame 9 is I'll start to form the fist even more on both hands. Watch that. It already starts to look better. The transition in the hand shapes from 8 to 11 just by forming fists at frame 9. The other thing to do is tweak the position and rotation of these hands so it gives us a more natural transition. So from frame 5 to frame 8 the hands went up a little bit. Maybe we can play with that. At frame 9 maybe take the hands up. Yeah, that may work. Okay, I'm going to play the animation. That looks like a much better transition for his hands. It could use more work, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to save this file, hide his controls, and make a play blast to see what this would look like. So it could definitely use some more work, but for the little time we spent on the cleanup, we're already getting good results. One thing I would improve here is at the end, instead of coming to a stop, I may have him overshoot and settle in. So he goes even higher and then settles down. So this is one way you can go from your stepped keys to linear in-betweens. Add some flavor to your anticipations, add some flavor to your post transitions, and maybe even add holds where you realize you needed them. Make those holds come alive and tweak your timing to make your actions a little snappier. That's all part of the cleanup process to have better in-betweens, better transitions. So this is what you can do with your blocking in the next step.